He was a man who had everything: a billion-dollar empire, a pristine reputation, and a beautiful, quiet wife who was the perfect ornament for his life. He thought he could have more. He thought a secret weekend with his young, ambitious mistress at New York's most exclusive five-star hotel was just another perk of his power. He booked the imperial suite, ordered the vintage champagne, and believed he was the king of his universe. But what he didn't know was that while he was checking in with his mistress, his wife wasn't at home planning a charity gala. She was in the penthouse boardroom signing the papers that made her the new queen of his castle. This is the story of how a man's secret getaway became his public downfall. The Rolls-Royce Phantom purred to a stop before the magnificent limestone facade of the Ethelgard Grand Hotel on Central Park South. Richard "Rick" Sterling, a man whose tailored Tom Ford suit cost more than the doorman's monthly salary, felt a familiar surge of power. At 52, his hair was more salt than pepper, but his ambition remained as sharp and black as his polished Oxford shoes. He owned half of the skyline he was currently admiring his name. Sterling Legacy Properties, blazoned discreetly on towers of glass and steel. Beside him, Chloe Summers, all of 26, practically vibrated with excitement. Her blonde hair was a cascade of perfect waves, her dress a sliver of silk that hugged a figure sculpted by Pilates and ambition. She looked at Rick with eyes that reflected his own greatness back at him, a mirror he found intoxicating. "Oh, Rick," she breathed, her hand tightening on his arm. "It's even more beautiful than in the pictures. Only the best for you. My dear," he murmured, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. He enjoyed this, the unveiling of a world she could only dream of. It affirmed his status, his success. He was not just a man. He was a gatekeeper to paradise. The doorman, a stoic figure in a charcoal greatcoat, opened Rick's door with a deferential nod. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling." Rick offered a curt nod in return. He was a regular, though usually for business lunches, at the hotel's 3 Michelin-star restaurant brilliance. This was different. This was personal, illicit. He felt a thrill, a dangerous spark, that his placid, predictable life with his wife Eleanor had long since extinguished. Eleanor. The thought of her was a fleeting shadow. He'd left her that morning in their sprawling Greenwich, Connecticut estate. She was arranging flowers, a serene and elegant figure in a cashmere sweater set. She was perfect, a Vance heiress, beautiful, poised, the ideal corporate wife. She ran their charities, hosted his dinners, and never, ever questioned him. Her predictability was both a comfort and a care. He'd told her he had an urgent last-minute board meeting in the city that would run through the weekend. She had simply smiled, kissed his cheek, and wished him luck, her lavender scent a ghost that clung to him for a few miles before being replaced by the heady jasmine of Chloe's perfume. Inside the lobby of the Ethelgard was a cathedral of wealth, a soaring coffered ceiling dripped with colossal baccarat chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of fresh lilies and old money. Marble floors gleamed, and the hushed whispers of the elite echoed softly. Rick strode to the private check-in, a discreet alcove reserved for their most valued clientele. Chloe clung to his arm, her eyes wide. "This feels like a movie." "This is real life, Chloe. My life," he corrected, gently patting her hand. "And soon yours." He had made her promises, of course, vague allusions to a future, a life beyond stolen weekends. He had no concrete plans to leave Eleanor. Divorce was messy, expensive, and terrible for the brand. But Chloe was a vital distraction, a validation of his youth and virility in a world where younger, hungrier sharks were always circling. The concierge, a woman with a practiced, warm smile, greeted them. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure. We have the Imperial Suite prepared for you. Everything is in order." "Excellent, Maria. You'll be sending up the hall. 82 Petrus." "It is already chilling, sir." As they were handed their keycard, a heavy gold-plated square, a man in a dark suit approached the concierge. He looked flustered, his eyes darting around the lobby. Rick recognized him vaguely as a junior manager. The manager, Mr. Davison, leaned in and whispered urgently to Maria, not realizing Rick's hearing was still sharp. "Is the penthouse boardroom secure? Mr. Croft is on his way up with the final documents. No one is to go to that floor without explicit clearance from him. The new chairwoman is arriving within the hour for the transition meeting." Maria nodded, her professional calm unwavering. "Of course, Mr. Davison. All is under control." Rick's brow furrowed slightly. The Ethel Guard was part of the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. He knew old Marcus Vance, its legendary and notoriously ruthless founder, had passed away about 6 months ago. The industry papers were buzzing about a potential hostile takeover by a rival conglomerate. He made a mental note to have his analyst look into it. There might be an opportunity there. But the thought was fleeting. He turned his attention back to Chloe, guiding her toward the private elevators. As the polished brass doors slid shut, enclosing them in their own private world, he leaned in and kissed her, the taste of her lipstick, a sweet promise of the weekend to come. The Imperial Suite was breathtaking. It was less a hotel room and more a palatial apartment with panoramic views of Central Park. A grand piano stood in one corner, a fully stocked bar in another. A bottle of Petrus was nestled in a silver bucket, next to 2 crystal glasses, and a decadent spread of charcuterie cheeses and fruits was laid out on the coffee table. Chloe gasped, spinning around in the center of the living room. "Rick, I'm speechless." "Don't be," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Get used to it." He nuzzled her neck, inhaling her scent. "I have a small matter to attend to in a bit. A quick meeting. Here in the hotel." "Business," she pouted, turning in his arms. "Of a sort," he said, a sly grin playing on his lips. "Let's call it an acquisition. A little side project I'm considering. A group of investors wants to meet. They think I'm the key to their next big move." His ego was fully inflated. He truly believed they had sought him out for his Midas touch. The meeting was scheduled for 3:00 p.m. in one of the hotel's smaller, more discreet conference rooms, the Concord Room. He'd been approached by a law firm, Croft and Associates, representing an anonymous consortium of investors who he was told held a controlling interest in the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. They were looking for a powerful partner, a titan of industry, to join their new board and help steer the company into the future. They had flattered him, appealed to his vanity, and he had taken the bait. The prospect of having a stake in the very hotel chain founded by his father-in-law was a delicious irony he couldn't resist. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. 2:45 p.m. Time to get ready. "You enjoy the champagne," he told Chloe, kissing her forehead. "Order anything you want from room service. I shouldn't be more than an hour." As he adjusted his tie in the grand gilded mirror, he felt invincible. He was Richard Sterling. He had the beautiful young mistress, the vintage wine, the palatial suite, and a lucrative new business deal about to fall into his lap. His wife was miles away, arranging flowers, blissfully unaware. He was the king, and this was his kingdom. Nothing could possibly go wrong. The Concord Room was on the mezzanine level, a space designed for intimacy and discretion. It had no sweeping views, only walls panelled in dark mahogany and adorned with sombre oil paintings of long-dead financiers. A long, polished table dominated the room, set with 12 leather chairs, crystal water glasses and monogrammed notepads. It felt less like a meeting room and more like a tribunal. Rick arrived precisely at 3:00 p.m. He expected to find a room full of eager investors, men in suits like his own, ready to court him. Instead, the room was empty except for one man standing by the window, his back to the door. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with silver hair and a posture that spoke of decades of authority. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, turning around. His face was lean and aquiline, his eyes a piercing blue. Rick recognized him instantly. This was Julian Croft, Marcus Vance's personal lawyer for over 40 years, a legendary legal shark in New York's corporate world. "Julian," Rick said, extending a hand, his confidence momentarily shaken. He hadn't expected to deal directly with the top dog. "I was expecting a consortium." Julian Croft's handshake was firm and cold. His lips barely curved into a smile. "They are on their way. Punctuality is a virtue few seem to possess these days. Please have a seat." Rick took a seat at the head of the table, the position he naturally assumed. Julian remained standing, a silent, imposing sentinel. The quiet in the room was unnerving. Rick was used to controlling the atmosphere, to filling the silence with his own confident patter. But here the silence belonged to Julian Croft. "I trust your accommodations are to your liking?" Julian asked, his tone flat, devoid of any real warmth. "The Imperial Suite is magnificent as always," Rick replied smoothly, trying to reclaim his footing. "You and your clients have excellent taste." He was trying to signal that he was an insider, a man of their world. "The Ethel Guard prides itself on a certain standard," Julian said cryptically. "A standard that must be maintained at all costs." The door opened again. This time, it was Mr. Harrison, the general manager of the hotel, a man Rick had known for years. Harrison looked pale, his usual professional bonhomie replaced by a palpable tension. He nodded stiffly at Rick, his eyes avoiding direct contact. He took a seat 2 chairs down from Rick, folded his hands on the table, and stared at them as if they held the secrets to the universe. Now Rick was genuinely confused. Why was the hotel's GM here? This was supposed to be an investment meeting, a discussion of board seats and stock options, not hotel operations. "Is everything all right, David?" Rick asked, addressing the GM directly. Harrison looked up, startled. "Mr. Sterling?" "Yes, everything is proceeding as planned." He glanced nervously at Julian Croft, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The main doors to the Concord room swung open again with a soft whoosh. Rick turned in his chair, a welcoming, powerful smile ready on his lips, expecting to finally see the money men, the anonymous consortium he was here to charm. His smile froze and shattered. Standing in the doorway was his wife, Eleanor. For a disoriented second, his brain couldn't process the image. It was like seeing a character from one movie wander into the wrong film. Eleanor belonged in Greenwich in art galleries, in the passenger seat of her Bentley. She did not belong here, in this room, at this meeting. And she was not the Eleanor he had left that morning. The woman he'd kissed goodbye was dressed in soft dove-grey cashmere. The woman standing before him was a vision of ice and steel. She wore a bespoke Armani power suit in a shade of midnight blue, so dark it was almost black. Her honey-blonde hair, usually worn in a soft chignon, was styled in a severe, elegant sweep back from her face. Her makeup was subtle but sharp, emphasizing the determined set of her jaw and the cold fire in her grey eyes. She held a leather portfolio in one hand, and her posture was ramrod straight. She looked taller, formidable. She was not his wife. She was a CEO, a predator. Rick shot to his feet, his mind racing. Was this a joke, a sting operation? Had she followed him? Did she know about Chloe? His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. "Eleanor!" He stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here?" She didn't look at him. Her gaze swept over the room, cool and appraising. She gave a slight nod to Mr. Harrison, who looked as if he might faint, and then her eyes landed on Julian Croft. "Julian," she said, and her voice was a revelation. It was the voice she used with staff, but sharpened to a diamond's edge. Clear, cold, and utterly entournement. "Is everyone present?" "Everyone who matters, Madam Chairwoman." Julian Croft replied, his tone now filled with a deep, unwavering respect. "Madam Chairwoman." The words hung in the air, electric and incomprehensible. Rick stared at his wife, his mind struggling to connect the dots. The anonymous consortium. The controlling interest in the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. The new chairwoman. Eleanor finally turned her eyes on him. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of the woman who had shared his bed for 25 years. Her gaze was that of a superior officer inspecting a junior subordinate who had committed a grievous error. "Richard," she said, the name sounding foreign and formal on her lips. "I see you received my invitation. Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss." She walked to the head of the table, the seat he had taken, and stood there waiting. Her silent command was absolute, mortified, his face burning with a confusion and shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. Rick stumbled back and took the chair to her right, the seat of a subordinate. Eleanor placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. She looked around at the small assembly. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard before. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eleanor Vance, and as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, I am the new majority shareholder and acting chairwoman of the board for the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group." Rick felt the blood drain from his face. Eleanor Vance. She hadn't used her maiden name professionally since the day they were married. It was a name he had absorbed into his own, a footnote in the story of sterling legacy properties. But he was wrong. He was so terribly, catastrophically wrong. The footnote, it turned out, was the real headline, and he was just the fine print. The silence that followed Eleanor's declaration was so absolute that Rick could hear the frantic thumping of his own pulse in his ears. It was a roaring, panicked sound that drowned out everything else. He stared at his wife, this stranger in an Armani suit, and his world tilted on its axis. Every certainty he had built his life upon his power, his control, his understanding of his own marriage, crumbled into dust. "Chairwoman." He finally managed to croak the word, feeling like sandpaper in his throat. "Eleanor, what is this? Is this some kind of elaborate joke?" Eleanor didn't even grant him a direct glance. She addressed her next words to Julian Croft, her voice as crisp as a starched collar. "Julian, perhaps you could clarify the situation for my husband. He seems to be under some misapprehension." The subtle emphasis she placed on husband was a scalpel deftly cutting him down. It reframed their relationship not as a partnership, but as a mere biographical detail, one that was currently an inconvenience. Julian Croft stepped forward, his expression impassive. "There is no joke, Mr. Sterling. Upon his passing, Marcus Vance's entire portfolio, including his 58% controlling stake in Vance Sovereign Hospitality, was transferred from his private trust into a new one. The sole beneficiary and trustee of that new trust is his daughter, Eleanor Vance. Rick's mind reeled. But that's impossible. Marcus hated me. He all but disowned Eleanor when she married me. His will was public knowledge. He left his fortune to a foundation for stray cats. It was true. The old man, a titan of industry, as ruthless as he was eccentric, had made his disapproval of Rick painfully clear. He saw Rick as a flashy upstart, a real estate developer who built glass boxes while Marcus Vance built legacies of stone and velvet. The public reading of his will had been a final posthumous insult, leaving his vast empire to the Marcus Vance Foundation for Feline Welfare, a move that had been ridiculed and celebrated in equal measure across the financial world. A faint, chilling smile touched Eleanor's lips for the first time. It was a victor's smile. My father was a complicated man, Richard. He enjoyed his theatre. The foundation was a smokescreen, a masterpiece of misdirection to keep vultures like you from circling what he truly valued. She paused, letting the insult land with surgical precision. He knew you would never see me as anything more than an accessory. He counted on it. He trusted that your arrogance would be the best shield for his true legacy. Her eyes finally locked with his, and the cold fury in them was terrifying. And he was right. Mr. Harrison, the general manager, cleared his throat nervously. Madam Chairwoman, the regional executives are waiting on a secure line for your introductory address. Thank you, David, Eleanor said, her attention shifting effortlessly to business. Patch them through to the conference screen in 5 minutes, and have a pot of Darjeeling tea brought to me. No sugar. She then looked back at Julian. Was there any other preliminary business? Just one item, Julian said, opening his own briefcase. He slid a single thick document across the polished table towards Rick. Per the instructions of the new chairwoman, we have conducted a preliminary review of all potential third-party partnerships. This includes the proposal submitted by Sterling Legacy Properties. Rick stared at the document. It was his own proposal, the one he had been so confident about, the one he thought he was here to discuss as a prospective partner. Now it lay on the table like evidence at a trial. My invitation here, it wasn't to join the board, was it? Rick asked, the sickening realization dawning on him. Don't be absurd, Eleanor said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. I invited you here to this hotel, to this room, for one reason: efficiency. I prefer to handle all my unpleasant business on the same day. And terminating this proposal is, I assure you, an unpleasant business. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the cover page of his proposal. Sterling Legacy Properties is over-leveraged. Your debt-to-asset ratio is alarming. You're facing liquidity issues on the Hudson Yards project, and you were counting on this partnership as a backdoor bailout. You were hoping to use my family's capital to save your failing company. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the facade of his success with an expert's knowledge. How could she know that he had buried the Hudson Yards problem under layers of creative accounting? He had told no one. How was all he could manage. I may have been arranging flowers, Richard, but I wasn't deaf or stupid, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. I read every financial report you left on your desk. I listened to every hushed phone call you took in your study. I have been watching you gamble with our future for 5 years. The difference is, you thought it was your future. You forgot that half of it was legally mine. She leaned forward slightly, the predator closing in. "And as for the Vance legacy that was never yours to even touch, my father may not have approved of my choice of husband, but he never stopped believing I was his daughter. He spent the last 10 years of his life secretly teaching me everything he knew. Every Thursday afternoon when you were at your Rotary Club lunch, or perhaps with your latest intern, I was in a downtown office with him and a team of forensic accountants learning how to spot a charlatan like you from a mile away. The revelation was staggering. Her quiet life, her garden clubs, her charity work. It had all been a cover. A long, patient, brilliantly executed deception. She hadn't been a quiet wife. She had been a queen in exile biding her time. His thoughts suddenly flashed to Chloe upstairs in the imperial suite, drinking vintage wine, waiting for him. The absurdity, the sheer pathetic cliché of it all hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been playing checkers while his wife was mastering three-dimensional chess. "So let's be clear," Eleanor continued, her voice rising again to its commanding boardroom tone. "The Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group is not interested in a partnership with sterling legacy properties. In fact, we consider your company's current financial instability to be a potential threat to the market. Consider this your official notice." She stood up, the meeting for her clearly concluded. "Julian will handle the formal rejection. David, walk me to the penthouse office. I want to see the view my father loved so much." As she started to walk past him, Rick, in a desperate last-ditch effort, reached out and grabbed her arm. "Eleanor, please. We need to talk. About us." She stopped. Slowly, she looked down at his hand on her arm with an expression of profound disgust, as if he were something she'd scraped off her shoe. She didn't pull away. She simply waited. "Take your hand off me, Richard," she said, her voice soft but laced with venom. "You are in my hotel, in my boardroom, and you are wasting my time. The conversation about us was over the moment you signed the hotel register with a woman named Chloe Summers." She knew. Of course she knew. She knew everything. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Eleanor straightened her sleeve, and without a backward glance swept out of the room, leaving behind a silence thick with the ashes of a man's life. Rick Sterling, the titan of industry, sank back into his chair, utterly and completely defeated. The king had been checkmated by the queen he never even knew was in the game. The penthouse office of the Ethelgard Grand was Marcus Vance's sanctuary. It was a world away from the mahogany and leather of the downstairs meeting rooms. The space was modern minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike 180-degree view of Central Park. It was a room that declared without speaking a word that its occupant was above the fray, observing the world from a position of unassailable power. Eleanor walked to the center of the room and stood before the vast expanse of glass, her reflection a stark silhouette against the sprawling green of the park and the glittering city beyond. For the first time since she had entered the Concord room, the iron mask of control slipped just for a moment. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her lips. She closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. Julian Croft entered the office behind her, closing the door softly. He approached not as a lawyer, but as the old family friend he was. "He taught you well, Marcus," Julian said quietly, standing a respectful distance away. "He would have been immensely proud of you today." Eleanor wiped the tear away with an angry, swift motion. "He would have been furious I let it go on this long," she countered, her voice thick with emotion. "He would have called me a fool for wasting 25 years on a man who saw me as nothing more than a well-bred broodmare." "He would have called you patient," Julian corrected gently. Marcus understood the long game better than anyone. He knew that revenge is a dish best served cold, but power is a legacy best built slowly and in secret. He didn't want you to be a mere heiress, Eleanor. He wanted you to be a ruler, and rulers need to understand their terrain before they conquer it. The story of her secret apprenticeship was one of quiet rebellion and profound love. After her marriage to Rick, Marcus Vance had, as Rick believed, all but cut her off. The public arguments were legendary. The disinheritance was his final dramatic act of public disapproval. But it was all a ruse. The Thursday art history lectures she supposedly attended at the Met were in fact clandestine meetings with her father. In a nondescript office building on Wall Street, far from the prying eyes of society gossips and corporate Siebtum, Marcus Vance had downloaded his entire life's work into his daughter's mind. He brought in his most trusted allies, lawyers, like Julian forensic accountants and ruthless M&A specialists. They didn't teach her about hotel management in the traditional sense. They taught her about corporate warfare. They taught her how to read a balance sheet to find the lies hidden between the numbers. They taught her the art of the leveraged buyout, the poison pill defense, the proxy battle. They taught her how to dissect a man's ego and use it as a weapon against him. "I still remember the first day," Eleanor murmured, her gaze distant. "He sat me down with the financials for a rival hotel chain. He said, forget the thread count of the sheets and the quality of the champagne. That's for managers. You are an owner. An owner only needs to know one thing: where is the weakness? For 10 years, she had lived a double life. In Greenwich, she was Mrs. Richard Sterling, the epitome of grace and domesticity. She planned charity galas, cultivated her award-winning roses, and played the part of the supportive, oblivious wife. But every Thursday, she would shed that skin and become Eleanor Vance, her father's protégé. Absorbing decades of wisdom, her mind becoming a fortress of corporate strategy. Her father's final illness had been swift and merciless. In his last lucid moments, he had made her promise 2 things. First, he had rasped his powerful voice, reduced to a fragile whisper. "Never sell. The Æthelgard is not a building. It is a symbol. It is the heart of our family." "I won't, Papa," she had promised, tears streaming down her face. "Second," he'd continued, his eyes fixing on her with a final burning intensity. "When the time comes, do not wound the snake. You cut off its head. Show him. Show all of them what a Vance is truly made of." After his death, Julian Croft had activated the plan they had meticulously crafted years before. The public will leaving everything to the Cat Foundation was executed with great fanfare. It was a brilliant piece of legal misdirection that was entirely legitimate, but told only a fraction of the story. The real assets, the controlling shares of Vance Sovereign Hospitality, were held in a series of offshore trusts and holding companies so complex they resembled a spider's web. The trigger for their consolidation and transfer to Eleanor was a single clause in the final trust document it would execute 6 months after his death on a date of her choosing. She had chosen today, August 27th, her 25th wedding anniversary. "The initial reports from the regional heads are in," Julian said, bringing her back to the present. He handed her a tablet. "The transition has been seamless. The board is consolidated. Your position is unassailable." Eleanor scrolled through the reports, her mind already shifting from the personal to the professional. The emotion was being packed away, locked in a vault. The chairwoman was taking over again. "What's the status on Sterling's financials?" she asked, her tone all business. "Just as you suspected," Julian confirmed. His Hudson Yards project is a black hole. He's been shuffling funds from his more stable commercial properties to cover the hemorrhaging losses, but he's running out of road. He secured a bridge loan from a private equity firm, Blackwood Capital, but the terms are predatory. He defaults in 90 days if he can't secure a major infusion of capital. Blackwood Capital, Eleanor mused. That's Alistair Finch's outfit, a shark who smells blood a mile away. She looked up from the tablet, a new, colder determination in her eyes. Alistair owes me a favour. My father's endorsement got his first fund off the ground. What are you thinking, Eleanor? Julian asked, though he already knew. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look Marcus Vance used to get right before a hostile takeover. Richard came to my company for a bailout, she said. He won't get one. But a predator never leaves a wounded animal to die of natural causes. That's inefficient. She walked over to the massive rosewood desk that had been her father's and sat in the chair. It felt right. She looked out at the city, her city now, and a plan began to form, cold, calculated, and utterly devastating. Julian, she said, her voice dropping to the register of command. Get me Alistair Finch on the phone, and then I want you to start drawing up the paperwork. I'm not interested in a partnership with Sterling Legacy Properties. She paused, looking at the name on a gold-plated placard on the desk, Marcus Vance. I'm interested in an acquisition. Back in the Imperial Suite, the 82 Petrus sat half-finished on the coffee table, its luxurious promise now tasting like ash in Rick's mouth. The decadent spread of food was untouched. The magnificent view of Central Park, which had seemed like a testament to his power an hour ago, now felt like a cruel mockery. The city outside was oblivious, humming with life and commerce, while inside this gilded cage, his world had imploded. He paced the length of the suite, his Tom Ford jacket discarded on a chair, his tie loosened. He had replayed the scene in the Concord room 12 times in his head, each replay more humiliating than the last. Eleanor's cold eyes, her new commanding voice, the way she had used her maiden name like a weapon, Madam Chairwoman. The title echoed in his skull, a death knell for the life he knew. His first instinct was to call her to try and fix this. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her name, Eleanor. It seemed so inadequate now. He pressed the call button. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Her familiar, gentle voice greeted him. You've reached Eleanor. Please leave a message. It was the voice of the wife he thought he knew, a ghost, from a life that no longer existed. He hung up without leaving a message. What could he possibly say? He tried again this time, calling her private line at the house. The housekeeper answered. The Sterling residence. It's Richard, Martha. Is Eleanor there? He asked, his voice strained. No, Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling left this morning. She said she'd be staying in the city for the foreseeable future. She left a package for you with security at the front gate. For the foreseeable future. The words were a slam of a door in his face. A package. He could only imagine what it contained. Divorce papers, probably. Or maybe just the keys to the Greenwich house, a clear signal that he was no longer welcome. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. This wasn't just about his marriage. His entire empire was on the line. Eleanor knew about Hudson Yards. She knew about his liquidity problems. Her statement, "We consider your company's current financial instability to be a potential threat to the market," was not just a rejection, it was a threat. If word of that got out, his lenders would panic. His credit lines would be frozen, and Blackwood Capital would descend upon him like a pack of wolves. He needed to get ahead of this. He dialed his CFO, Mark Renshaw. "Rick, I thought you were in meetings all weekend," Mark said, his voice casual. "Change of plans," Rick snapped. "Listen to me, and listen carefully. I want a complete lockdown on all our financials. No one, and I mean no one, talks to the press or any outside analysts. We need to project absolute stability. Put out a press release first thing Monday morning. Announce a new fictional expansion project. Something big. International. We need to look strong." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Rick, what's going on? Is this about the Vance Group deal? I thought that was a sure thing." "The deal is dead," Rick gritted out. "And it's worse than that. The new chairwoman of Vance Sovereign it's Eleanor." Mark was silent for a full 10 seconds. "Eleanor, your Eleanor." "Yes, my Eleanor," Rick yelled, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Just do what I said." Mark locked down complete radio silence. He hung up, his breathing ragged. He felt the walls of the suite closing in. He was trapped. It was then that the bedroom door opened. Chloe emerged, wrapped in a fluffy Ethelgard robe, a champagne flute in her hand. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright. She was still living in the movie, oblivious that the script had been torched. "Hey you," she said, her voice a seductive purr. "That was a long meeting. Did you buy the whole company?" Rick stared at her. At her youth, her naivete, her transactional affection. An hour ago she had been a symbol of his power and freedom. Now she looked like a liability, a grotesque living monument to his own stupidity. The affair wasn't just an infidelity. It was a catastrophic business miscalculation. He had brought his own Trojan horse into the enemy's citadel. "Get dressed," he said, his voice flat and dead. Chloe's smile faltered. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," he muttered. "The ghost of my entire future. We're leaving. Now." "Leaving? But we just got here. You said we had the whole weekend." She whined, the petulant tone that he usually found charming, now grating on his raw nerves. "The weekend is cancelled," he snarled, turning on her with a fury that made her flinch. "The acquisition fell through. The hotel is compromised." "Compromised? What are you talking about?" she asked, her confusion turning to fear. "Rick, you're scaring me." He didn't have the energy to explain the sheer magnitude of the disaster. How could he explain that the quiet, elegant woman she had probably seen in photos and dismissed as a society wife was now the most dangerous person in his life? "Just pack your things, Chloe," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "It's over." As Chloe scurried back into the bedroom, her fantasy weekend dissolving into a nightmare, Rick walked to the window. He looked down at the city below. The people looked like ants, all scurrying along their own paths, unaware of the titan who was about to fall from the sky. He had built his name, his legacy, on being the smartest man in the room. He anticipated market shifts. He exploited his rivals' weaknesses. He was always 10 steps ahead. But he had lived for 25 years with a woman whose true identity he had never even bothered to investigate. He had underestimated her, ignored her, and in doing so had handed her the very sword she was now holding to his throat. The cracks in the sterling empire were no longer just financial. They were foundational. They ran right through his home, his marriage, and his own colossal ego. And as he stood there, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon, he had the terrifying premonition that Eleanor was not just going to let him fall. She was going to push him. The ride back to Chloe's trendy but soulless apartment in Chelsea was a silent, suffocating affair. The comfortable luxury of the Rolls-Royce now felt like a tomb. Rick stared blankly out the window, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret, while Chloe sat rigidly on the opposite side of the plush leather seat, smart enough to know that any attempt at conversation would be met with a volatile response. When the car pulled up outside her building, Rick didn't move. "I'll have your things sent over from Greenwich tomorrow," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was a dismissal. Chloe's head snapped towards him, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning fury. "That's it? You're just dumping me? After all this? After all your promises?" "The promises were based on a reality that no longer exists," he said coldly. "The game has changed, Chloe, and you're not a player." "I'm not a player," she scoffed, her voice rising. "I'm the reason you're in this mess. You brought me to her hotel, you idiot. You paraded me right in front of her. Don't you think I have some value in this? Don't you think she'd pay to know the details of your sordid little life?" It was a clumsy threat born of desperation, but it struck a nerve. He turned to look at her, his eyes narrowed. "Don't be a fool. You're an insect to her, a gnat. The affair is irrelevant now. This is business. You have nothing she wants." "I have you," she shot back, her voice cracking. "I have your secrets. I have a year's worth of your texts, your emails, your pathetic, lonely late-night calls. Do you really think your precious brand can survive that kind of scandal right now, on top of everything else?" He almost laughed. "My brand. My brand was just executed in a boardroom by my wife. What you have is kindling for a bonfire. It's meaningless. Now get out of the car." Tears of rage and humiliation streamed down Chloe's face. She had bet everything on this man, on this life. She had seen herself as the next Mrs. Sterling. Now she was being discarded like a piece of trash. Her ambition, curdling into pure spite, gave her a final, reckless idea. If the king wouldn't pay, maybe the queen would. She got out of the car without another word and slammed the door. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, she took out her phone, her hands shaking. She didn't have Eleanor's number, but she was resourceful. A quick search brought up the main number for the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group's corporate headquarters. 2 days later, Eleanor was in her father's, now her office, deep in a meeting with her new acquisitions team. They were mapping out the vulnerabilities of Sterling legacy properties, preparing for a corporate raid of breathtaking speed and precision. Her focus was absolute. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Madam Chairwoman, I apologize for the interruption. There is a Miss Chloe Summers in the lobby. She insists on speaking with you. She claims it is a deeply personal matter." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something amusement, perhaps, or contempt passed through her eyes. The gnat had come to buzz at her window. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor said calmly. "Send her in." Her acquisitions team looked at her surprised. "Are you sure?" one of them asked. "Perfectly," Eleanor replied. "Let's take a 15-minute break. I believe this falls under the category of opposition research." Chloe was escorted into the cavernous office. She had clearly put a lot of thought into her appearance, opting not for a seductive dress, but for a sophisticated, albeit ill-fitting business-style outfit. She was trying to present herself as a serious person, an equal. The effect was that of a child playing dress-up. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield, her bravado from 2 days ago replaced by a visible nervousness, now that she was face-to-face with the Queen in her throne room. "Mrs. Sterling," Chloe began, her voice trying for a firmness it didn't possess. "I mean, Miss Vance." "You can call me Madam Chairwoman," Eleanor said, not unkindly, but with a tone that instantly established the immense gulf between them. She did not stand or offer a seat. She remained behind her vast desk, a symbol of untouchable authority. "You have 5 minutes. My time is valuable." Thrown off balance, Chloe rushed into her poorly conceived plan. "I'm here to discuss Richard. What he's done to both of us. He lied to me, just like he lied to you. I have information things you could use against him. In your divorce." Eleanor listened patiently, her hands steepled before her, her expression unreadable. "I have records," Chloe continued, gaining a bit of false confidence. "Texts, photos from our trips, voicemails. He told me he loved me. He promised he would leave you. I thought it was only fair that you see the full extent of his betrayal. For a price, of course. Consider it compensation for my emotional distress." When Chloe finished, the silence in the office was heavy. Eleanor stared at her for a long moment, her gaze analytical, as if she were examining a specimen under a microscope. "Let me see if I understand this," Eleanor said finally, her voice soft but deadly. "My husband, a man of questionable judgment, began an affair with a woman of questionable character. He then brought this woman to my hotel on our anniversary, as part of a weekend that was meant to be the culmination of his plan to defraud my family's company. Now, having been discarded by him after his plan spectacularly failed, you have come to me, the woman you were sleeping with my husband behind my back, to sell me the sordid details of the affair." She paused, letting the pathetic summary hang in the air. "Have I missed anything?" Chloe's face turned pale. "When you put it like that, I can't imagine putting it any other way," Eleanor cut in sharply. "Let me explain something to you, Miss Summers, because you seem to be operating under a very flawed set of assumptions. You assume that you are a player in this drama, that your affair was the cause of my actions. You are mistaken." She stood up and walked to the window looking out over the park. "You are not the disease, Miss Summers. You are a symptom. You are a cliché. You are the kind of cheap, predictable, short-term gratification a man like my husband seeks when he is terrified of his own mediocrity. He didn't turn to you because he stopped loving me. He turned to you because he stopped respecting himself." She turned back to face Chloe, her eyes blazing with cold fire. "You think your texts and photos are a weapon. My weapon is a $9 billion hospitality empire and a team of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in New York. You are offering to sell me a pocket knife while I am preparing to launch a nuclear strike." She walked back to her desk and pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, please show Miss Summers out." Chloe was frozen in place, utterly humiliated. "But your 5 minutes are up," Eleanor said, sitting down and picking up a financial report, her attention already elsewhere. "I would advise you to find a new benefactor, Miss Summers, because the Sterling account is about to be permanently closed. Oh, and one more thing." She looked up one last time, her expression one of final, absolute dismissal. "If you or anyone associated with you ever attempts to contact me or my company again, I will instruct my legal team to destroy you. Not for the affair, I truly don't care, but for the sheer audacity of wasting my time. Is that clear?" Stunned into silence, Chloe could only nod. She turned and practically fled the office, the quiet click of the closing door sealing her complete and utter irrelevance. Eleanor did not watch her go. She was already back at work, dismantling her husband's empire one calculated move at a time. The gnat had been swatted. 30 days later, the final act played out in the main boardroom of the Vance Sovereign Hospitality Group. At the head of a monolithic black marble table sat Eleanor, flanked by her formidable board. At the far end, looking haggard and utterly defeated, was Richard Sterling. In the preceding month, his empire had crumbled. Strategic leaks orchestrated by Eleanor's team had caused his stock to plummet and lenders to panic. He was here as a last resort to beg. He made a weak, desperate plea for the Vance Group to acquire his company's debt and save him from ruin. The underlying assets are still valuable, he argued, his voice raspy. It's a temporary cash flow crisis. Eleanor listened with cold patience before nodding to her CFO. The woman delivered a brutal clinical assessment. The portfolio is a house of cards leveraged to the hilt. We project Sterling legacy properties will be insolvent within 6 weeks. Taking on their debt would be fiscally irresponsible. Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. The board has unanimously rejected your proposal. Rick slumped in his chair. So you'll just let me fall, he whispered. What you built, Eleanor corrected her voice sharp with personal history, was a mirage built on my family's name and my inheritance. You used my credibility as your collateral. She paused, letting the truth settle before delivering the coup de grace. However, we are prepared to make you an alternative offer. A flicker of hope ignited in Rick's eyes as Julian Croft slid a single document down the table. An LLC, Vance Strategic Holdings, offers to buy Sterling legacy properties in its entirety, Julian stated. They will assume all debts. The purchase price is $1. Rick stared at the paper, the words blurring. Vance Strategic Holdings. Eleanor's lips curved into a chilling smile. That would be me. A private fund I established last week. I am not interested in saving your company, Richard. I am interested in owning its carcass. I will absorb the viable assets and liquidate the rest. She stood, her authority absolute. You have 24 hours to accept. Otherwise, we let your creditors tear you apart. This is the only offer that lets you walk away without personal bankruptcy. She looked at him one last time, her voice a soft, final judgment. You always talked about your legacy. Congratulations, Richard. You are about to become a footnote in mine. She swept from the room, leaving him alone with his ruin. He picked up the pen, his hand shaking, and signed away his entire world for a single $1. And so Richard Sterling vanished from the world of high finance. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of his own arrogance. His name was stripped from the buildings he built, his reputation erased. Chloe Summers faded back into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in the lounges of New York. But Eleanor Vance, her star had just begun to rise. She transformed the Vance Sovereign Group into a global powerhouse, her name synonymous with integrity, intelligence, and ruthless strength. She proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful, and that underestimating someone is the most dangerous mistake you can ever make. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation, of a woman taking back her name, her power, and her destiny. What did you think of Eleanor's ultimate move? Was it brilliant justice or cold-hearted revenge? Let me know in the comments below. If you love stories where the underdog comes out on top with a brilliant twist, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible, real-life dramas. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.
What if one quiet morning during breakfast, your whole life shattered? What if love turned into betrayal right before your eyes? I know you're curious, because who wouldn't be? Stay with me, my friend. This story is going to grab your soul and not let go. The night was still clinging to Manhattan's skyline when Ambrose Blackwell, a man whose very name commanded respect in the cutthroat world of real estate, slipped quietly into his penthouse. The city glittered beneath him, 1,000 lights echoing the glamour of the life he had built. But inside his home, the air was heavy, waiting, still, and colder than he realized. His tuxedo jacket reeked faintly of perfume that wasn't his wife's, and the faint lipstick smudge on his collar told a story he believed he had hidden well. To Ambrose, the night had been a triumph, a gala with investors, a champagne-soaked celebration, and the intoxicating company of his mistress. He thought he was untouchable, a king at the height of his reign. What he did not know was that his empire was about to tremble, not from the stock market, but from the fragile hands of the woman he had once vowed to love. In the kitchen, the glow of the morning sun broke through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Jacqueline Blackwell's trembling fingers as they rested on a stack of papers. She was 6 months pregnant, her belly a quiet testament to promises broken, to a future that suddenly seemed uncertain. She had waited all night, sleepless and hollow-eyed, replaying every whispered rumor, every unexplained absence, every perfumed trace that clung to her husband's clothes. Tonight, the truth had become unbearable, undeniable. She had heard it from friends, she had seen it in his dismissive eyes, but last night, when Ambrose didn't return, when the city swallowed him whole, Jacqueline finally accepted it. She was no longer the wife of his heart, only the keeper of his image. Her pulse thundered as she set the papers down at his usual breakfast seat. Not a love note, not a gentle plea, but divorce papers. Pages that carried the weight of her broken trust, her unborn child, her dignity. She wasn't the naive girl from upstate New York anymore, the one who had believed in fairy tales. She was a woman scorned, and though her body was tired, her spirit was ablaze with a single, unwavering decision. She would not be silent, she would not be humiliated, she would not raise her child in the shadow of betrayal. The penthouse clock ticked louder than usual, each second pulling her closer to the inevitable confrontation. She thought of the girl she used to be, the girl who had met Ambrose at a glittering gala during college, dazzled by his confidence and promise. That girl had believed ambition was romantic. That girl had followed him into boardrooms, into late-night strategy sessions, into dreams so big they swallowed their nights whole. That girl had sacrificed herself to support him, to be the calm anchor in his storm of ambition. And yet, where had it brought her? To this very morning, pregnant and abandoned, preparing to hand her husband the papers that would rip their world apart. Ambrose, careless in his arrogance, hummed to himself as he loosened his tie, striding toward the kitchen without noticing the stillness that hung in the air. To him, it was just another morning after another conquest. He expected Jacqueline to greet him softly, to set breakfast in front of him, to pretend nothing was wrong, just as she always had. He did not see the steel in her eyes, the quiet fire that had been building inside her heart, waiting for this exact moment. When he entered the kitchen, he froze. The sight was so ordinary it startled him. Jacqueline sitting at the table, her face pale but composed, the divorce papers neatly placed before her. For the first time in years, Ambrose felt the earth shift beneath him. She wasn't weeping, she wasn't shouting, she wasn't begging, she was silent, steady, and stronger than he remembered. The air between them was sharp enough to cut. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice trembling not with weakness, but with restrained fury. "I thought you'd like something different for breakfast today." Her hand slid the papers across the table toward him. Ambrose blinked, uncomprehending at first. Divorce papers? Here, in his sanctuary? He forced a smirk, the kind that had charmed countless investors and disarmed rivals. "Jacqueline, darling, what is this? Some dramatic gesture?" His words dripped with condescension, but even as he spoke them, his chest tightened. He recognized the calm in her eyes. It was the calm of someone who had already let go. Jacqueline's fingers brushed against her swollen belly, her gaze never leaving his. "It's not a gesture. It's the truth. You broke every promise. You broke me, and now I won't let you break our child too." Her voice cracked at the word child, and for a fleeting second Ambrose saw not the woman challenging him, but the woman who had once stood beside him at the Plaza Hotel, radiant in white, her hand clasping his as they vowed forever. But that memory dissolved quickly, swallowed by the weight of his betrayal. The silence grew unbearable. Outside, the city roared with its usual morning chaos, taxis honking, sirens wailing, deals being struck. But inside the penthouse, time seemed suspended. Ambrose picked up the papers with trembling hands, his facade cracking. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. For the first time in his carefully orchestrated life, he didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to control the narrative. Jacqueline rose slowly, steadying herself against the table. She wasn't going to argue. She wasn't going to beg. She was simply going to leave him with the truth. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "You wanted a mistress? Fine. You can have her, but you'll never have me again." And with that, she turned toward the hallway, her bare feet soft against the marble floors. Ambrose's voice finally broke through, raw and panicked. "Jacqueline, wait." But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. Because she knew something he hadn't yet realized. The moment she handed him those papers, the real story had only just begun. And as the door closed behind her, Ambrose Blackwell understood for the first time that his greatest battle wasn't in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. It was in the kitchen that morning, with the wife he had just lost forever. Glenn Mitchell Blackwell had never been the type of woman people expected to end up in the pages of glossy magazines or the gossip columns of Manhattan society. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't raised with silver spoons or weekends in Paris. She came from a quiet town in upstate New York, where life was measured by community fundraisers, church picnics, and the steady rhythm of small-town traditions. Her father had worked long hours at a local hardware store, his hands permanently rough from years of labor. Her mother was a schoolteacher, patient and devoted, teaching more than just math or reading, teaching values, honesty, sacrifice, and compassion. From a young age, Jacqueline stood out, not because of money or status, but because of her ambition. While her peers were content with the narrow world of their hometown, she dreamed of city skylines and opportunities bigger than herself. She was a girl who volunteered at every charity event, who stayed up late studying by lamplight, who believed that if you worked hard enough, you could reach the stars. Her dream was simple yet powerful: to make a difference, to matter in a world that too often ignored women who looked like her. She won a scholarship to an Ivy League university, a miracle in itself. Stepping into New York City for the first time, she felt both terrified and alive. The streets roared with ambition, with people who walked fast and talked faster, with opportunities hidden around every corner. Jacqueline threw herself into her studies, determined not to waste the gift she'd been given. She studied economics, volunteered at charity events, and balanced 3 part-time jobs to cover the expenses her scholarship didn't. Life was exhausting, but every step brought her closer to the woman she wanted to become. It was at one of those charity galas during her junior year that her path crossed with Ambrose Blackwell. She had been working the event, serving hors d'oeuvres to wealthy donors. He was already making a name for himself, an ambitious entrepreneur, carving out a slice of Manhattan real estate with his ruthless charm. She noticed him before he noticed her. Tall, confident, laughing easily among men twice his age, he looked like someone born to win. When their eyes finally met, something inside Jacqueline shifted. Ambrose introduced himself with the polish of a man who knew his power. But instead of brushing her off as another student worker, he asked her about her studies, her ambitions. She remembered being surprised by how intently he listened, how he laughed at her nervous jokes, how his gaze lingered just a little too long. For Jacqueline, who had never believed herself particularly glamorous or worldly, his attention was intoxicating. For once, she felt seen, not as the poor scholarship girl, not as the waitress balancing plates, but as a woman with dreams worth listening to. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Candlelit dinners on the Hudson, late-night walks through Central Park, weekends in the Hamptons he borrowed from business partners. Jacqueline was swept into a world she had only glimpsed from a distance. And though there were warning signs, his obsession with winning, the way his phone never stopped buzzing, the occasional sharpness in his tone when she questioned him, she chose to ignore them. She told herself this was what ambition looked like. This was what it took to succeed, and Ambrose, with his magnetic confidence, made her feel like she belonged in that glittering world. By the time she graduated, she was not just Ambrose's girlfriend, she was his partner. She helped him draft business proposals, listened to his anxieties, celebrated his victories. When he proposed at the Plaza Hotel in front of 100 flashing cameras, she said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was covered in lifestyle magazines, complete with Jacqueline in a custom gown and Ambrose smiling like a man who had conquered both love and empire. But the truth was, Jacqueline had also made sacrifices, silent ones, the kind women often make in the name of love. She turned down a job offer at a prestigious nonprofit to focus on their marriage. She learned how to move in his world, how to host dinners for investors, how to smile politely at women who looked at her like she didn't belong. She convinced herself that it was temporary, that her own dreams could wait, that building Ambrose's empire together was enough. Years passed, his wealth grew, his name became synonymous with power, and Jacqueline learned to live in the shadows of his ambition. Yet she never lost her softness. She still volunteered, still believed in small kindnesses. She had a way of making people feel seen, even when she herself felt invisible. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Ambrose stayed out later, his explanations thinner, his temper sharper. And Jacqueline, once so confident in her worth, began to question whether she mattered to him at all. When she found out she was pregnant, her heart swelled with hope. She thought maybe this would bring them closer again. Maybe Ambrose would slow down, remember the love that had once bound them. For a brief moment, it seemed true. He kissed her belly, whispered promises of being the best father, and told her they were entering a new chapter. Jacqueline believed him because she wanted to. Because love, even when bruised, clings to hope. But the reality was harsher. As her belly grew, so did his distance. As she spent nights alone, folding baby clothes and imagining a nursery, Ambrose spent nights in hotel suites, at galas, or in the arms of another woman. Jacqueline felt the shift like a knife. The way he stopped touching her, the way his eyes drifted elsewhere, the faint perfume on his suits. Each small betrayal cut deeper than the last until she could no longer ignore what was happening. And yet, even in her pain, Jacqueline held on to dignity. She wasn't the type to scream in public, to hurl accusations. She endured quietly for the sake of the child she carried. But deep down, something inside her was hardening. She remembered her mother's words, "Never let anyone decide your worth, not even the man you love." That morning at breakfast, when she slid those divorce papers across the table, it wasn't just an act of anger. It was the culmination of years of sacrifice, of swallowed tears, of choosing silence over confrontation. Jacqueline had finally chosen herself. She had finally chosen her child. What Ambrose didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jacqueline was stronger than she had ever been. She wasn't just a wife scorned. She was a mother determined. And this was only the beginning of her transformation. Because beneath her grief, Jacqueline carried a secret that would turn Ambrose's empire upside down, and he would soon learn that betraying her was the most costly mistake of his life. The Blackwell penthouse was more than a home. It was a symbol. Perched high above Midtown Manhattan, its glass walls opened onto a city that pulsed with relentless ambition. From the living room, you could see the flashing lights of Times Square, the streaming traffic on Fifth Avenue, the glittering Hudson in the distance. Every inch of the space had been designed to impress. Polished marble floors reflected the morning light, chandeliers imported from Italy sparkled like captured stars, and art worth millions hung silently on the walls. To outsiders, this was the dream. The palace of a man who had conquered New York's real estate game. When guests stepped into the Blackwell home, they whispered in awe. They drank champagne from crystal flutes, posed for photographs against the panoramic windows, and left convinced that Ambrose Blackwell and his wife Jacqueline were the very definition of perfection. But perfection was a mask, and Jacqueline knew it better than anyone. For her, the penthouse was a gilded cage. She remembered the first time she moved in after their wedding. She had been dazzled, just like everyone else. She ran her fingers along the velvet drapes, laughed at the absurd size of the walk-in closet, and thought she had finally arrived at the life she had once dreamed about. But as years passed, the sparkle dulled. The silence of the massive rooms became suffocating. The grand dining table, meant for 16, was almost always set for 2, and more often than not, she ate alone. Jacqueline would sit by the window at night, her hand resting on her growing belly, looking down at the city below. The world outside was alive, filled with people chasing dreams, laughing, living. Yet inside, in her marble palace, she felt like a ghost. Every sound, the click of her heels on the polished floors, the hum of the central air, the faint ticking of the Cartier clock on the mantel, reminded her how empty the space truly was. The penthouse had different layers, each reflecting Ambrose's hunger for power. The lower level was designed for entertaining, a wine cellar stocked with rare vintages, a library filled with first editions, and a private theater where he hosted screenings for investors. The upper level was more private, their bedroom, a spa-like bathroom with a tub carved from a single block of Italian stone, and a nursery in progress, decorated with soft creams and pale blues. Jacqueline had chosen the wallpaper herself, a pattern of tiny stars and moons she hoped would soothe their baby at night. But Ambrose had barely set foot in the room. Instead, his kingdom was the office, a fortress of glass and steel that dominated one corner of the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves displayed awards and framed magazine covers bearing his face. A massive desk, cluttered with contracts and deal memos, faced the window so he could survey the empire he had built. Jacqueline often avoided that room. It wasn't just an office, it was a shrine to his ego, a constant reminder of the man she had married and the man he had become. What haunted Jacqueline most was how this setting reflected her own erasure. The penthouse had no trace of her touch. There were no family photographs on the walls, no silly souvenirs from their vacations, no evidence of the life they had once shared. Even in the bedroom, the decor was stark, minimalist, chosen by Ambrose's designers, not by her. Sometimes she wondered if he had ever truly seen her, or if she had simply been another accessory to his rise. The irony was bitter. The city outside celebrated Ambrose as a man of vision, a builder of dreams. But inside his own home, he had built a prison for his wife. Jacqueline tried to remind herself that this wasn't always the case. There had been moments early on when laughter echoed off the walls, when their shared dreams filled the empty spaces. But those moments had faded, replaced by business dinners, whispered phone calls, and nights when Ambrose didn't come home at all. That morning, as she slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table, Jacqueline couldn't help but glance around the space one more time. The marble counters, the gleaming appliances, the vase of fresh lilies Ambrose had ordered through his assistant, not for her, but for appearances. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. A stranger walking in might think they were the happiest couple in Manhattan. But Jacqueline knew the truth. Her mind drifted to the gala Ambrose had attended the night before. She could picture it clearly. Crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed tables, men in tuxedos and women in gowns glittering with diamonds. That was his true setting. Not home with her, but out there, where ambition and temptation blurred into one. She imagined him smiling for cameras, whispering in the ear of the woman on his arm, his mistress, while the world applauded his success. The contrast was almost unbearable. And yet, Jacqueline realized the setting that had once made her feel small could now become her weapon. She understood something Ambrose had forgotten. Appearances could be destroyed as quickly as they were built. He had built his empire on perception, on the illusion of being invincible, untouchable, adored. But illusions were fragile. All it took was one crack in the glass, one truth exposed, and the entire structure could shatter. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the skyline through the window. This city had a way of crushing people, but it also had a way of lifting them higher than they ever thought possible. Jacqueline was no longer content to be crushed. She wasn't leaving this penthouse empty-handed, nor was she leaving it defeated. She would find her strength here, in the very place that had once silenced her. Because this setting, this luxurious, cold, glittering cage, wasn't just the backdrop of her humiliation. It was about to become the stage of her rebirth. And as Ambrose stood frozen at the table, staring at the divorce papers, he had no idea that the walls of the very penthouse he adored were about to bear witness to the unraveling of his empire. Ambrose Blackwell was the kind of man people either envied or feared. To the world, he was the definition of a self-made tycoon, born with nothing, rising through grit, charm, and relentless hunger. He had built a real estate empire worth billions before turning 40, his name whispered with reverence in boardrooms from Wall Street to Hong Kong. To investors, he was magnetic. To journalists, he was a story that sold. To mistresses, he was temptation wrapped in power. But to Jacqueline, Ambrose was something else entirely, an illusion. The man she had once adored, who had wooed her with candlelight dinners and whispered dreams, was no longer there. In his place stood a man intoxicated by success, convinced he was untouchable, careless with the very foundation that had allowed him to climb so high. He had begun to treat life like one of his business deals, calculate risk, maximize gain, discard what no longer served him. Unfortunately, Jacqueline and their unborn child had become just another liability in his eyes. Ambrose loved the spotlight. He thrived on the attention of women who saw him not as a husband or father, but as a golden ticket. Among them, one figure stood out, Cassandra Ward. Cassandra was everything Jacqueline was not, at least in the shallow terms Ambrose valued. She was 27, with raven hair, a body sculpted by personal trainers, and a sharp tongue that made her seem daring in a crowd. She worked in luxury PR, orchestrating glamorous galas and product launches, which made her presence in Ambrose's orbit seem convenient. But convenience had nothing to do with it. Cassandra knew how to flatter him, how to stroke his ego until he felt invincible. And Ambrose, blinded by vanity, mistook her manipulation for admiration. To society, Cassandra was just another pretty face attached to a powerful man. But behind closed doors, she wielded influence. She whispered into Ambrose's ear that he deserved better than a wife who stayed home in maternity clothes. She laughed at his jokes, told him he was the smartest man she'd ever met, and reminded him at every opportunity that he was still young, still desirable, still unstoppable. She was poison disguised as champagne, bubbly, intoxicating, and lethal in the long run. Jacqueline had heard her name long before she saw her. Rumors in society circles traveled fast. Ambrose Blackwell's new protege, they called her, though everyone knew what that really meant. At galas, people whispered, exchanged knowing glances when Ambrose and Cassandra disappeared at the same time. Jacqueline, humiliated but determined to preserve her dignity, ignored the whispers as long as she could. But last night, when Ambrose stayed out until dawn, the truth became impossible to ignore. Ambrose himself didn't even try to hide it anymore. That was the cruelest part. He strutted through the penthouse like nothing was wrong, his cologne tinged with the scent of another woman's perfume. He told himself Jacqueline would never leave him, that she needed him, depended on him, couldn't survive without him. That arrogance was his downfall. The contrast between them was stark. Jacqueline, swollen with the child they had created, waiting alone in a cavernous penthouse, while Ambrose lounged in VIP booths with Cassandra, her laughter ringing in his ear. To Ambrose, Jacqueline had become invisible, her sacrifices irrelevant, her love forgotten. He convinced himself that as long as he provided financially, he owed her nothing else. Cassandra, on the other hand, played her part perfectly. She paraded herself at his side in sequined gowns, photographed at charity events, whispering promises of a glamorous future that Jacqueline could never compete with. She was bold where Jacqueline was gentle, reckless where Jacqueline was careful, shallow where Jacqueline was profound. And Ambrose, addicted to novelty, mistook her recklessness for passion. But Cassandra wasn't in love. She was strategic. She knew Ambrose's weaknesses, his ego, his need for validation, his fear of growing old and irrelevant. She fed those weaknesses daily, ensuring he stayed hooked. For her, Ambrose was a stepping stone, not a soulmate. A man with connections, wealth, and power, an opportunity wrapped in expensive suits. She never planned to grow old with him. She planned to use him until his shine dulled and then move on to the next glittering prize. Ambrose couldn't see it. He believed he was in control, that he was the hunter. But in truth, he was prey, chasing the illusion of youth, blind to the wife at home, whose quiet strength outshone any mistress's charm. In private, Ambrose began to speak of Jacqueline with contempt. "She's so dull now," he confided to a colleague one night. "All she talks about is the baby, the nursery, the doctor visits. I need excitement. I need to feel alive." His colleague nodded politely, though even he knew Ambrose was playing with fire. Cassandra smiled when she heard such words. Every insult toward Jacqueline cemented her influence. "You deserve someone who matches your energy," she purred. "Someone who understands your lifestyle." And Ambrose, blinded by vanity, believed her. Yet, even as he sank deeper into Cassandra's trap, the foundation beneath him began to crack. What Ambrose didn't realize was that Jacqueline was no longer the silent, passive woman he imagined her to be. With every insult, every absence, every night she spent alone, her resolve hardened. While he was out flaunting his mistress, Jacqueline was preparing her own quiet revenge. The antagonists of this story, Ambrose and Cassandra, believed they were writing the script. They believed Jacqueline was a background character, destined to fade. But what they failed to understand was that the true power often lies in silence. And when silence finally breaks, it does so with the force of an earthquake. Ambrose returned home that morning smug, convinced that the world was still in his palm. Cassandra had kissed him goodbye, promising another secret rendezvous, another night of reckless pleasure. He thought nothing could shake him. But when he walked into the kitchen and saw Jacqueline waiting with divorce papers, his confidence faltered for the first time in years. For the first time, Ambrose realized he wasn't the only player in the game, and he had no idea that the woman he underestimated most was about to become the very storm that would bring his empire crashing down. The morning Jacqueline handed Ambrose the divorce papers was only the beginning. Betrayal in private was painful, but betrayal in public was devastating. And for Jacqueline, the moment came faster than she expected. 2 weeks after that fateful breakfast, the Blackwells were scheduled to appear at one of Manhattan's most glamorous events, the Metropolitan Charity Gala. It was an annual tradition, the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, where CEOs, politicians, and celebrities mingled under chandeliers the size of carriages. The Blackwells had been on the guest list for years, always arriving arm in arm, the picture of elegance and power. Jacqueline dreaded it now, but appearances still mattered, and Ambrose insisted they go. He framed it as obligation. "Investors will be there," he told her, adjusting his cufflinks in front of the mirror. "We need to show unity." His voice carried the arrogance of a man who still believed he controlled the narrative. Jacqueline, still reeling from his betrayal but unwilling to give him the satisfaction of retreat, agreed. She would go, not as his accessory, but as his equal. The night of the gala, the grand hall glittered with excess. Gold-trimmed tables overflowed with orchids, waiters carried trays of champagne, and a string quartet played beneath an arch of cascading crystal. Photographers clustered at the entrance, their flashes capturing every arrival. Jacqueline wore a gown of deep emerald silk that hugged her figure, her belly now a soft curve beneath the fabric. She chose it deliberately, a reminder that she carried not just the weight of betrayal, but the promise of new life. Ambrose, in his custom tuxedo, looked every bit the conquering tycoon. To the cameras, he smiled broadly, holding Jacqueline's arm, whispering staged compliments. For a fleeting moment, Jacqueline thought perhaps he understood the importance of keeping up appearances. But the illusion shattered the moment they stepped inside. Cassandra was there. She stood near the silent auction tables, draped in scarlet sequins, her lips curved in a smile that was anything but innocent. Conversations faltered as people noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone had heard the rumors. But seeing her there, bold as daylight, was something else entirely. Jacqueline's stomach tightened, but she held her head high. She had endured enough humiliation in private. Tonight, she would not falter. Ambrose, however, seemed unfazed. He greeted acquaintances, laughed too loudly, and glanced toward Cassandra with the arrogance of a man who thought no one could touch him. The betrayal reached its peak during the auction itself. Ambrose, standing before donors and investors, announced a new real estate project. Cameras flashed, applause filled the air, and then, without hesitation, he invited Cassandra onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ambrose declared, his hand resting lightly on her back, "meet the brilliant woman helping shape this project, Cassandra Ward." Gasps erupted. Investors exchanged uneasy glances. The mistress wasn't just in the room. She was on stage, introduced by Ambrose himself. And Jacqueline, pregnant and dignified, sat in the front row, her face illuminated by the same lights that glorified her husband's betrayal. The cruelty of it stole her breath. For years, she had been the one supporting him behind the scenes, drafting speeches, soothing his nerves, smiling at events while hiding her loneliness. And now, in front of Manhattan's elite, he discarded her for another woman, as though she were irrelevant. She felt the burn of humiliation as eyes turned toward her, some filled with pity, others with judgment. A society matron whispered too loudly, "Poor Jacqueline." A younger woman smirked. "He finally upgraded." But Jacqueline refused to crumble. She clasped her clutch tighter, lifted her chin, and forced her tears back. If Ambrose thought this moment would break her, he was wrong. When the presentation ended, applause scattered uncertainly. Cassandra basked in the attention, her hand lingering on Ambrose's arm. He grinned, convinced he had made a statement of power, but in reality, he had made a spectacle of disgrace. As the night unfolded, the whispers grew. "Did you see? His wife is right there. How shameless." The very people Ambrose sought to impress now looked at him with unease, and Jacqueline, silent but steady, became the figure everyone couldn't stop glancing at. There was strength in her stillness, dignity in her composure. She was not the one embarrassed, he was. Later, as guests mingled near the champagne fountain, Jacqueline excused herself from the table. She walked gracefully through the crowd, her gown brushing against polished marble floors. Heads turned as she passed, her presence commanding in a way Ambrose could never manufacture. She reached the exit doors and paused, looking back one last time. Ambrose caught her eye, a flicker of unease crossing his smug expression. For the first time, doubt crept in. Perhaps he realized then that Jacqueline's silence was not submission. It was strategy. Jacqueline left the gala without a word, stepping into the cool night air. The city buzzed around her, indifferent to her pain, yet strangely liberating. For the first time in months, she felt in control. Betrayal had humiliated her in public, but it had also freed her. She no longer had to pretend. The cameras outside caught her exit, pregnant, poised, and alone. By morning, the tabloids would feast on the scandal. But instead of pity, Jacqueline would find something else: sympathy, support, and a platform she never expected. Because sometimes the very stage meant to humiliate becomes the stage where a woman rises. And as Jacqueline disappeared into the Manhattan night, Ambrose had no idea that the headlines awaiting him would mark the beginning of his downfall. When Jacqueline stepped into her car after the gala, her hands shook so violently that she dropped her clutch onto the floorboard. The emerald silk of her gown shimmered under the city lights, but inside she felt stripped bare. Humiliation clung to her like a second skin. All those people, the whispers, the cameras, it replayed in her mind like a cruel film she couldn't stop. She pressed her palms against her belly, whispering an apology to the life inside her. "I'm so sorry, little one," she murmured. "You don't deserve this." The driver asked softly if she wanted to go home. She shook her head. Home. That penthouse wasn't home anymore. It was a prison filled with memories of laughter that had curdled into lies. "Just drive," she whispered. And so they drove, weaving through the sleepless city, while Jacqueline tried to steady her breathing. She finally returned to the penthouse near midnight, though every bone in her body screamed against it. As soon as she stepped inside, the silence crashed down. The crystal chandelier above glimmered mockingly, as if to remind her that she was trapped in a palace of betrayal. She tore off her heels, her footsteps echoing across the marble as she collapsed onto the velvet sofa. Tears came then, uncontrollable and raw. For weeks she had fought to stay composed, to hide her pain behind polite smiles and steady words. But now the dam broke. She sobbed until her throat burned, clutching a throw pillow as though it could hold her together. Her body shook, her chest heaved, and for the first time since Ambrose's betrayal, she allowed herself to fall apart. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was everything. The years of sacrifice, the loneliness, the way she had abandoned her own dreams to build his. The moments she told herself to stay silent for the sake of peace. The hundreds of nights she fell asleep alone while he was out chasing glory. Every memory rushed back like a flood, drowning her in grief. Jacqueline thought about her parents, about the values they had instilled in her. They had raised her to be strong, to endure, to hold her head high. But in this moment she felt like she had failed them. And failed herself. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of making a difference in the world. Where had that girl gone? Somewhere along the way, she had buried her under layers of compromise and sacrifice, until only Ambrose's shadow remained. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Dozens of notifications from news outlets and gossip blogs. Headlines screamed across the screen, "Blackwell wife humiliated at gala." Mistress takes center stage. Pregnant wife watches in silence. The end of the Blackwell fairy tale? Jacqueline turned the phone face down, unable to bear another word. Her chest ached, her pulse pounded, and despair clawed at her throat. She was exhausted, more than she had ever been in her life. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if she had the strength to go on. She dragged herself to the nursery, a place that had once filled her with hope. The wallpaper of tiny stars and moons shimmered faintly in the dark. She sank into the rocking chair, resting her hands on her belly. The baby kicked gently, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. The sensation brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered into the silence. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Her thoughts spiraled. What if Ambrose took everything? What if she ended up penniless, raising a child on her own in a city that chewed up the weak? What if the world only ever saw her as the woman who was left, the wife who wasn't enough? Fear gripped her like a vice. She had always been resilient, but betrayal had cracked her in ways she didn't know how to repair. The following days blurred together. She barely ate. She wandered the penthouse in silence, haunted by memories of a love that no longer existed. Every corner reminded her of Ambrose, his laughter in the office, his cologne lingering in the bedroom, the way he used to hold her hand at the balcony railing. Even the sound of the city below seemed cruel, a reminder that life went on while hers had crumbled. Friends called. She ignored them. Her mother's best friend left a voicemail, pleading for her to visit, but Jacqueline couldn't bear the thought of facing anyone. She felt too exposed, too fragile. It was as if the whole world had witnessed her humiliation and was waiting to see if she would rise or collapse. One evening, she stood at the window, staring at the twinkling skyline. The city had once filled her with awe. Now it mocked her. She pressed her forehead against the glass, her reflection staring back at her. Pale, tired, broken. "Who are you?" she whispered. She barely recognized herself anymore. Her breakdown reached its peak the night she discovered Ambrose had given Cassandra one of her necklaces, a sapphire pendant that had been a wedding gift from her parents. She saw the photo online, Cassandra wearing it at another event, smiling smugly beside Ambrose. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. Jacqueline collapsed onto the floor, clutching her belly, her sobs echoing through the empty penthouse. It was in that moment, at her lowest point, that something inside her shifted. She realized she couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep drowning while Ambrose thrived. She had someone depending on her now, someone who deserved better than a broken mother. Her baby needed her to rise. Jacqueline wiped her tears, though her hands still trembled. She wasn't ready yet. She still felt shattered. But somewhere, deep in the rubble of her heart, a spark glowed faintly. A spark that whispered of survival, of strength, of transformation. And as she sat there in the dark, clutching her belly, Jacqueline had no idea that an unexpected ally was about to step into her life and ignite that spark into a fire. The morning after Jacqueline's collapse on the nursery floor, she awoke with swollen eyes and an aching body. For the first time in weeks, however, there was something new in her chest, a flicker of resolve. She sat up slowly, one hand on her belly, and whispered, "I will not let him destroy me. I will not let our child inherit this pain." Her phone buzzed again. Normally she ignored it, but this time she answered. The voice on the other end startled her. It was Daniel Whitaker, an old acquaintance from her university days. Daniel had once been a shy, studious boy who admired her from afar, but life had changed him. Now he was one of New York's most respected attorneys, known for his unshakable integrity and courtroom brilliance. "Jacqueline," he said gently, "I saw the news. I won't pretend to know all the details, but if you need someone in your corner, someone you can trust, I'm here." Her throat tightened. For weeks, she had felt utterly alone. Now, for the first time, someone was offering support without judgment. "Daniel," she whispered, "I don't even know where to begin." "Begin with the truth," he replied. "Everything Ambrose has done, everything you've endured. Don't hold back. I'll handle the rest." Jacqueline hesitated. Years of silence and self-preservation made her cautious. But something in Daniel's tone, steady, kind, certain, broke down her walls. She told him everything. The loneliness, the mistress, the humiliation at the gala, the necklace stolen from her past. By the time she finished, her voice shook with exhaustion. but Daniel's response was firm. Jacqueline, you're stronger than you think. And Ambrose may have power, but he's not untouchable. You have more leverage than you realize. She frowned. What do you mean? Daniel hesitated, then lowered his voice. Ambrose's empire isn't as clean as it looks. I've seen whispers and legal filings, loopholes, shady partnerships. If he pushes you into divorce without fairness, those secrets could surface. You're not powerless, Jacqueline. You're dangerous to him. Her heart pounded. For so long she had felt like the weaker one, the discarded wife. Now, for the first time, she saw the possibility of standing on equal ground. Over the next week, Daniel became her anchor. He visited the penthouse, helping her gather documents, reviewing contracts Ambrose had once asked her to sign without explanation. In her old journals, she had scribbled notes from conversations, things Ambrose let slip late at night when he thought she wasn't listening. Each scrap of information became valuable now. One evening, as they sat in the nursery surrounded by papers, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Jacqueline, do you realize what you have here? If Ambrose tries to take everything from you, you can dismantle his entire image. You hold the match that could set his empire on fire. Jacqueline stared at the pile of evidence, her pulse racing. For years, Ambrose had made her feel invisible. But invisibility had its advantages. While he dismissed her, she had quietly absorbed details, patterns, mistakes he thought went unnoticed. And now, those details could become her weapon. The idea terrified her. She wasn't a fighter by nature. She was a nurturer, a believer in forgiveness and grace. But betrayal had forged her into something new, a woman who would do anything to protect her child. Daniel seemed to sense her fear. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You don't have to become him to beat him. You just have to be brave enough to stand in the light. His words settled in her heart like a promise. She wasn't becoming Ambrose. She was becoming herself again. The woman her parents raised, the woman she had buried beneath sacrifice. Days turned into nights of preparation. Daniel coached her on what to say, how to hold her ground. Together, they built a case that could not only secure her divorce, but expose Ambrose's hypocrisy. Jacqueline began to change. She carried herself differently, her shoulders straighter, her gaze sharper. The woman who had crumbled on the nursery floor was gone. In her place stood someone reborn. But the twist wasn't only legal. Jacqueline discovered something else, something deeply personal. Late one night, Daniel admitted quietly, Jacqueline, I don't just see you as a client. I see you as the woman I always admired, even back in college. You were light then, and you're light now, even when you don't see it. His confession stunned her. She had been invisible to Ambrose for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. She didn't respond immediately. Her heart was still too raw, but something inside her stirred. Perhaps she wasn't unlovable. Perhaps she wasn't the discarded wife she feared she had become. Still, Jacqueline knew she had to tread carefully. Her focus wasn't romance. It was survival. It was reclaiming her life, her dignity, her child's future. Yet Daniel's presence gave her strength in ways she hadn't expected. He reminded her of the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of making a difference, the one who believed she was worthy of love and respect. The more Ambrose flaunted his affair, the more determined Jacqueline became. She no longer cried when she saw his name in headlines with Cassandra. Instead, she saw them for what they were: distractions, smoke and mirrors. Soon, the world would see the truth. One afternoon, Jacqueline stood by the window of the penthouse, looking out at the skyline. The city no longer mocked her, it challenged her. She pressed her palm against the glass and whispered, I'm ready. Behind her, Daniel's voice was steady. Then let's begin. What neither of them knew was that Ambrose had already sensed the shift, and he was preparing a countermove that would test Jacqueline's courage more than ever. The woman who once hid in silence was gone. Slowly but surely, Jacqueline Blackwell was shedding the fragile shell Ambrose had forced her into, and something new, something stronger, was emerging. The change began subtly. She replaced the shapeless maternity dresses Ambrose had once mocked with elegant gowns tailored to her form, garments that celebrated her pregnancy instead of concealing it. She visited the salon for the first time in months, allowing a stylist to restore the soft chestnut waves of her hair. When she looked in the mirror afterward, she barely recognized herself. Her reflection no longer showed a woman broken by betrayal. It showed a woman reborn, glowing with both vulnerability and quiet defiance. Daniel noticed it too. When he arrived at the penthouse one afternoon, briefcase in hand, he paused, visibly struck by the sight of her. "You look powerful," he said softly. Jacqueline smiled, her hand brushing her growing belly. "I have to be," she replied, "for both of us." But her transformation wasn't just external. It was a mental rebirth. For weeks, Daniel had been guiding her through strategy sessions, teaching her how to control a narrative, how to face Ambrose without fear. At first, her voice trembled, but with each rehearsal, with each affirmation, she grew steadier, sharper, fiercer. She practiced in the mirror until she could look into her own eyes and say the words that once terrified her. "I am enough. I am worthy. I will not be destroyed." The first test of this new strength came at a charity luncheon hosted by one of Manhattan's most influential socialites. Jacqueline debated not attending. After the humiliation at the gala, her instinct was still to avoid crowds. But Daniel urged her to go. "People need to see you," he said. "Not as a victim, but as a woman standing tall." And so, Jacqueline arrived at the luncheon in a sapphire gown, her head held high. The room fell silent as she entered. Conversations paused, eyes turned. The whispers began, but this time she didn't shrink from them. She walked with grace, her posture flawless, her gaze steady. Some faces softened with sympathy, others hardened with envy. But all of them watched her, riveted. When approached by reporters, Jacqueline did not flinch. "Mrs. Blackwell, how are you handling the rumors about your husband?" one asked. She smiled faintly, her voice calm. "I don't respond to rumors," she said. "I focus on truth, and the truth always comes to light." The answer spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was quoted across tabloids and blogs. For the first time since her public humiliation, Jacqueline wasn't painted as the broken wife. She was painted as dignified, composed, and unshakable. Ambrose, of course, noticed. That evening, he stormed into the penthouse, his face red with fury. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Undermining me in front of the press?" Jacqueline stood calmly at the kitchen counter, sipping tea. "I didn't undermine you," she replied coolly. "I spoke the truth." Her calmness infuriated him more than anger ever could. He slammed his hand against the marble countertop. "You think you're clever now? You think anyone cares about you without me?" Jacqueline met his glare without flinching. "They don't care about me because of you, Ambrose. They care because they see strength, something you've forgotten how to have." For the first time, Ambrose faltered. He saw it, the spark in her eyes, the steel in her tone. She wasn't the obedient woman he had discarded. She was something else now, something he could no longer control. Jacqueline's transformation extended beyond society events and confrontations. She began volunteering again, reconnecting with her roots. She visited women's shelters, donating resources quietly, listening to stories of survival that mirrored her own. Each conversation reminded her she wasn't alone, that countless women had endured betrayal and rebuilt their lives. Their strength fueled hers, their resilience mirrored her own journey. The press took notice. Headlines shifted. Jacqueline Blackwell rises from scandal with grace. Betrayed but unbroken, Blackwell wife leads with dignity. A new symbol of strength in New York society. Ambrose seethed. He had spent years crafting his image as the invincible mogul, and now his wife, pregnant, betrayed, and radiant, was stealing the spotlight. Cassandra urged him to tighten control. "You can't let her outshine you," she hissed. "People need to know who the real power is." But Ambrose was beginning to realize power was slipping through his fingers, no matter how tightly he clutched. Meanwhile, Jacqueline's confidence bloomed in unexpected ways. She began speaking with investors Ambrose had neglected, listening to their frustrations, offering empathy where he offered arrogance. Many were shocked at her insight, her ability to recall details from conversations years past. She was no longer the silent wife in the background. She was becoming a player in her own right. Daniel watched with pride. "You don't even realize it, do you?" he said one evening as they reviewed documents. "You're not just surviving, Jacqueline. You're leading." Jacqueline looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't want to lead his world," she admitted. "I want to build mine." That statement marked the turning point. Jacqueline began sketching ideas for her own foundation. one dedicated to women and children navigating betrayal and rebuilding. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about transformation. She wanted her pain to become purpose, her scars to become strength for others. But even as she rose, she knew the storm wasn't over. Ambrose wasn't the type of man to accept defeat quietly, and Cassandra, with her hunger for status, wouldn't go down without a fight. The battlefield was shifting, but the war was far from done. Still, for the first time in months, Jacqueline felt the fire of possibility. She wasn't merely reacting to betrayal anymore. She was rewriting the script. The woman who once crumbled in silence was gone. In her place stood a mother, a fighter, a survivor who had discovered her voice. And as Jacqueline prepared to step into her new role, she had no idea that her greatest chance for revenge and her greatest test of strength would come on the very stage Ambrose once used to humiliate her. The night of reckoning came in the same way humiliation had come to Jacqueline. Under the glow of chandeliers, in front of flashing cameras, with all of Manhattan society watching. It was the Blackwell Foundation Gala, an event Ambrose himself had created years earlier to solidify his image as a philanthropist. Ironically, this time, it would become the very stage that undid him. Jacqueline had debated whether she was ready. Could she really face him? Face Cassandra? Face the same crowd that once pitied her? But as she stood before her mirror that evening, smoothing the fabric of her ivory gown, she realized she wasn't walking into battle for herself alone. She was walking in for every woman who had ever been silenced, discarded, or humiliated. For her child. For her future. Daniel met her in the lobby, his expression softening when he saw her. "You're radiant," he said. She gave a small smile, steadying her breath. "Tonight," she whispered, "I stopped being his shadow." The gala pulsed with extravagance. Violins swelled, champagne flowed, diamonds glittered beneath the chandeliers. Ambrose was already there, Cassandra at his side in a gown of blood-red silk. They posed for photographs, smiling as if they owned the night. Ambrose's arrogance was unshaken. He believed the narrative was still his to control. But when Jacqueline entered, the entire room shifted. Conversations faltered, cameras swung toward her, and silence fell like a wave. She glided in, radiant and poised, her hand resting on her belly. Gasps filled the hall. This was no broken wife. This was a woman transformed. Ambrose's smile froze. Cassandra's lips curled in a smirk, but her eyes betrayed unease. Jacqueline didn't acknowledge them. She walked straight past, commanding the attention of the crowd with grace alone. Daniel guided her toward the stage, where she was scheduled to give a speech Ambrose had arrogantly assumed would be routine, ceremonial. But Jacqueline had rewritten it. When she took the podium, the audience leaned forward. Her voice was clear, strong, carrying across the glittering room. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight, we gather for the Blackwell Foundation Gala, a tradition meant to honor compassion, dignity, and truth. But tonight, I will not deliver the speech my husband expected. Tonight, I will speak my truth." A ripple moved through the audience. Ambrose shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Cassandra's nails dug into his arm. Jacqueline continued. "Many of you know me as Ambrose Blackwell's wife. For years, that was my role, standing silently at his side, smiling for photographs, hosting dinners, raising our home. But behind the glitter, behind the polished marble walls of our penthouse, there was another story. A story of betrayal, of humiliation, of sacrifice unseen." Gasps echoed. Cameras flashed. Ambrose shot to his feet, hissing, "Jacqueline, enough!" But she raised her hand, her eyes locking on his with a calm that silenced him more effectively than shouting ever could. She turned back to the audience. "I was betrayed not just as a wife, but as a woman who gave up her dreams to build someone else's. Betrayed in private, and finally, betrayed in public. You all saw it. You all whispered, and I carried the weight of that silence alone." The hall was so quiet, the chandeliers seemed to hum. Jacqueline's voice steadied further. "But silence is no longer my choice. I will not be invisible. I will not be discarded, and I will not allow my child to inherit shame instead of dignity." At that, she gestured toward Daniel, who handed her a folder. She opened it, holding up the evidence they had gathered, documents, contracts, financial records. "For too long, this empire has been built on illusion. But illusions crack. And tonight, I choose truth." The screens behind her lit up with projections. Contracts showing Ambrose's unethical dealings, images of Cassandra flaunting stolen jewelry, timelines that aligned his absences with fraudulent business trips. The crowd gasped louder with every slide. Investors muttered, journalists scribbled, cameras clicked furiously. Ambrose lunged forward. "This is slander," he shouted. "None of this means anything." But Jacqueline's voice cut through. "It means everything, Ambrose, because the world deserves to know the man behind the mask, and I deserve to reclaim my voice." The audience erupted, not with pity this time, but with applause. Women rose to their feet, clapping, nodding, tears in their eyes. Men who had once envied Ambrose now whispered furiously among themselves, realizing the emperor had no clothes. Ambrose stood frozen, his face pale, sweat forming at his temples. Cassandra tried to pull him back, but the photographers swarmed, their lenses capturing every crack in his composure. The empire he had spent years constructing was unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of his wife's truth. Jacqueline stepped down from the podium, the applause still echoing. Daniel took her hand, steadying her as she walked past Ambrose. She paused in front of him, her eyes steady, her voice low but firm. "You thought I was weak. You thought I would disappear. But you forgot, Ambrose, women like me don't vanish, we rise." And with that she walked away, leaving him standing in ruins before the entire city. But as the applause thundered, Jacqueline knew the war wasn't over. Exposing him publicly was only the beginning. The real battle, the one for her child's future, her independence, and her own soul, was still ahead. And in the shadows of the gala, Cassandra was already plotting her next move, one that could put everything Jacqueline had built at risk. The aftermath of the gala spread like wildfire. By dawn, newspapers across the country blazed with headlines, "Blackwell Empire shaken by wife's revelation." Jacqueline Blackwell exposes husband's betrayal in front of elite. From humiliation to heroine, the rise of Jacqueline. For Ambrose, it was the beginning of the end. Investors pulled out within days. Stocks tied to his companies plummeted. Government officials announced investigations into his business practices, spurred by the very evidence Jacqueline had revealed. Cassandra, realizing her golden ticket was crumbling, vanished from his side almost overnight. The woman who had once whispered promises of devotion now refused to take his calls. Ambrose raged, threatened, begged, but none of it mattered. The empire he had built on arrogance and illusion was collapsing brick by brick. For the first time in years, he was powerless. And Jacqueline? She was free. The divorce proceedings, guided by Daniel's steady hand, ended swiftly and decisively. Ambrose tried to fight, but the evidence stacked against him left him cornered. Jacqueline secured financial independence, the penthouse, and full custody of her child. She had not only survived, she had triumphed. But her victory wasn't defined by money or property. It was defined by dignity. For the first time in years, she walked through the marble halls of her home without feeling like a prisoner. The space that once mocked her now felt like hers. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. As the weeks passed, Jacqueline poured her energy into building the foundation she had once dreamed of. The Rising Light Foundation opened its doors, offering resources, counseling, and shelter to women facing betrayal, abandonment, and abuse. She spoke at events not as Ambrose's wife, but as Jacqueline Blackwell, a woman who had endured, fought, and risen. Her story resonated. Letters poured in from women across the country. Some wrote of their own heartbreaks. Others simply thanked her for reminding them they weren't alone. Each letter strengthened her resolve, proving that her pain had not been wasted. One spring afternoon, Jacqueline stood on a small stage at the foundation's opening ceremony. She wore a simple white dress, her baby bump now round and proud. The room was filled with supporters, survivors, and journalists. Daniel stood at the back, watching quietly, his gaze filled with pride. Jacqueline's voice was steady as she spoke. "When my world fell apart, I thought I was finished. I thought betrayal had destroyed me. But I was wrong. It didn't destroy me. It revealed me. And I want every woman in this room, every woman who has ever been told she is not enough, to hear me clearly. You are not defined by someone else's betrayal. You are defined by your strength, your resilience, and your choice to rise." Applause filled the room. Tears shimmered in the eyes of strangers. And Jacqueline knew in that moment she had found her true purpose. 2 months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Gabriel, after her grandfather, a man who had taught her the value of honor and courage. Holding him in her arms, she felt a peace she had long forgotten. His tiny fingers curled around hers, anchoring her to a future filled with hope. Daniel was there at the hospital, waiting in the hallway with flowers. He didn't push, didn't demand. He simply stood by her side, a quiet constant in the storm. Over time their bond deepened, not as a fairy tale rebound, but as something real, steady, and built on trust. He never tried to replace what she had lost. Instead, he helped her rediscover what she had always deserved. Ambrose, meanwhile, faded from the headlines. His empire crumbled under lawsuits and investigations. The man who once believed himself untouchable was reduced to whispers of pity. Jacqueline never spoke ill of him publicly. She didn't need to. His downfall was his own doing. Her silence toward him was not weakness, but closure. Years later, when Gabriel was old enough to ask about his father, Jacqueline answered with honesty, but without bitterness. "Your father made mistakes," she said softly, "but those mistakes don't define you. You are your own person, and you will grow with love, not lies." The transformation of Jacqueline Blackwell became more than just a story. It became a symbol. A symbol that betrayal does not end a woman's life, that silence does not mean weakness, that dignity can be reclaimed even after public humiliation. And as she stood one evening on her balcony, the skyline glittering before her, Gabriel asleep inside, she allowed herself a smile. The city that once mocked her now felt like a companion, pulsing with the same resilience she had discovered in herself. She whispered into the night, a promise for her child, for herself, and for every woman still struggling in the shadows. "I am not broken. I am not forgotten. I am free." And with that, Jacqueline Blackwell stepped fully into her new life, not as a victim of betrayal, not as the shadow of a powerful man, but as the heroine of her own story. All right, my wonderful friends, so the story has come to an end. You're still here with me, aren't you? If you stayed all the way to this moment, then something in Jacqueline's journey must have touched your heart too. Maybe it's the reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, healing is possible. The Stoics used to say, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And Jacqueline proved that by rising above humiliation and choosing strength over despair. Her fall did not define her. Her rise did. And that's the lesson for us. Your pain can become your power, and your scars can be the map to someone else's survival. If this story resonated with you, do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and don't forget to subscribe. Together, let's keep reminding each other. We are never broken, only becoming.